Great, thank you. So welcome to our community call. Today's topic is models for balancing hospitality, life, and work. Really, I think most of us in the world could have something to say and something to learn about this topic. And certainly at retreat centers where we're creating this sacred hospitality, which involves our whole person, our whole selves, and sometimes involves parts of us that we're not sure how to manage. So there's a lot for all of us to gather here. This conversation came out of a Facebook post where people were asking questions of each other, and there was enough activity that was like, wow, there's a lot to talk about here. We could have a whole community call on this. And we're so grateful to Jamie Deering, who volunteered to facilitate this call, and to a host of panelists who volunteered to share some of their experience. And we all get to learn a little bit about that on the call today. We're recording the call so that folks in your organization and at other organizations across the RCC can check in on what we've learned. And there'll be a portion of the call that we won't record so that we can be a little more vulnerable and share about things that might be more challenging. So we want to make sure that there's space for both aspects of that in today's conversation. As I said before, I'm the program director here at the RCC. I use he, him pronouns. I'm based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I don't work at a retreat center. So a lot of my role is learning about what retreat centers need and finding ways for retreat centers to support each other. With that, I will turn it over to Jamie. And thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. I'm Jamie Deering. I'm the program's ministry director for the Franciscan Sisters of Little Falls in Little Falls, Minnesota. And I moved here just about 2 years ago to become part of an intentional community that's part of the Sisters ministry in a different city in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So I lived in an intentional community for 2 years. Just 2 months ago, moved to a dream home on the lake, feeling like I extended that welcoming community to this space where I now live and enjoy welcoming family and friends. So, and my housemate, Sister Michelle, is here on the call, so I welcome Michelle. And I'm really just delighted to be here and part of facilitating these hosts of folks who are going to talk about their experiences. So we have 7 people who are going to talk about their experiences, and they're going to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves and maybe one self-care activity. And then after that, we're going to be talking through some questions. There'll be time at the end for some Q&A time. And as we go, if you have questions that come up, put them in a direct message to Ben, and he'll collect all those questions. And at different parts of our time together, we'll have those questions come up. But that way we aren't distracted by watching chat questions come up. We can really dive into listening to what folks have to say. So with that, and Ben's put that in the chat for you. Let's start with Karen. Karen, tell us a little bit about yourself. This is Karen McAllister. She's coming to us from Canada. About yourself and maybe a self-care activity.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Welcome everybody, and thank you, Ben and Erin, for inviting me here today. It's very excited to be asked, and also my colleague from Clear Sky, Duncan Cryle, is here too. So Clear Sky Meditation Center is in British Columbia. It's in the interior of British Columbia, and we're glad to say that today is our first smokeless sky. We've had a lot of smoke for the last week or so, so all my love and kindness and all support to all the firefighters in the region for this last few months. So I live and work at the meditation center. I've been living it's a residential monastery, and I've been living full-time here since 2017, but I've been in and out of this particular residential monastery since 1998 actually. So I have lots to share on models for balancing hospitality, work, and life. It's a very passionate subject for me. I do Karma Yoga here at the center. It's a Buddhist orientated center. So I do Karma Yoga, and then I'm chair of the board and director of fund development. And then I also have a livelihood job, a job that brings in the bucks, that brings in the money. So I'm actually a mindful money coach. I have my own little business, online business for that. just very quickly, yeah, we're the residential community. They're usually committed for at least 2 years here, but really it's with a no end date until it is no longer the best place for some of us to be here. We pay rent and food, and we have a discount for lower income earners for a certain period of time. I don't know if you want me to go into those sort of things, Jamie, or just
Sure,
yeah.
I think a little bit of information about your center is great. Thanks, Karen.
Okay, great. So most of us, we work our livelihoods 4 days a week. About half of us work off-site and others of us work remotely on site. Thank God for COVID, it has increased that wonderful ability to actually be at our centers and work on site too. Many of us are counselors or social workers or acupuncturists in town. So we do that beautiful social service to the community. And each residence has a space holding day that they manage, and we all tend to care or manage a particular portfolio. So we have a lot of different pieces happening at the same time, and I'm very proud that we're doing. I'm really excited to talk about more the nitty gritty pieces of how we do that later on in the call. Let me see, anything else? We're not paid, so we're not paid staff. So we meditate in the morning, we meditate in the evening. That really helps to bring the community, give them a very strong center with each other. And you know, we eat meals together, and we are encouraged to be financially sustainable. That's really important to us. And if someone is not there yet, we ask them to focus on that. And sometimes they need to go away from the center to organize or develop that and come back again in order to be part of the community. So we're very much about supporting not the scarcity mentality, but supporting a generative mentality, particularly around money. So I think one self-care thing that I do, well, we have a food forest. We really pay attention to the land here. So I am on the computer a lot and it drives me crazy sometimes. So I usually dip into the food forest now and again and do some harvesting, or just sit in one of the benches. We have a lot of meditation benches around the property, and just sit in some of the forests around and meditate for an odd 5 minutes, or between clients and between some of my service work here. So thank you, Jamie. I'm going to hand it on to the next number 2 of the panel.
Mm-hmm. That would be Larry. But I have a quick question for you, Karen. Did I hear that you eat meals together?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we eat lunch together and dinner together, and it's quite lengthy. I think the lunches and the dinners can last an hour to an hour and a half. So we at the beginning we do a few minutes of silence so that everybody allows the digestive system to focus on the food, and then there's great teachings and learnings and trainings at the table. So yeah, we really, and of course a lot of our neurosis in our families of origin come up around the table, right? So a lot of people heal a lot through being in the community with food and eating together. So it's a really quite a very interesting way of healing our hearts.
Great, thank you. Okay, Larry, let's hear from you.
Hey everyone, my name is Larry J. I'm the director at Rolling Ridge Retreat and Conference Center in North Andover, Massachusetts, which is about 35 miles north of Jen, who's down at Beacon Hill. So just a little 35 miles north in Boston, just below the New Hampshire border. I've been the director here for about 6.5 years. And our ministry is very different than what Karen, as well as Jamie. I'm the director at a facility that's primarily a rental facility. We have a number of programs that we do, but a lot of our space is simply rented out. I am on staff here as the director, and so I've got a parsonage that's about 1/3 of a mile away from the main center of the campus, and so I'm walking distance, driving distance of the facility. So when we have groups on site, we don't necessarily have any staff that's in the immediate vicinity, but I become one of the closest staff people if something does go on, if there's an emergency or whatnot. I do have another staff member who lives in another building not too far away, and so he technically is the emergency contact number, and so, but if he's not available, I become the emergency contact. And so our staffing model is a little different than an intentional community, in the sense that none of my staff other than myself and Will live on grounds. Everyone is off-site we commute on, everyone commutes to work, and I commute down from the parsonage. Will comes in from his own space as well. So we don't necessarily have an intentional community in that way, but the impacts that I experience of being on site come from the fact that I live and work on the property. And so for me to be able to maintain life separate from the facilities is always going to be one of those challenges, because when something goes sideways, oftentimes I'm needing to kind of be involved with that. Prior to being here at Rolling Ridge in Massachusetts, I was actually in California at a camp and retreat facility where I served for about 10 years, and I also lived on the property, but that property had about 10 to 12 people living on site, and so we didn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily an intentional community either, but we would have regular gatherings of meals and fellowship time together as part of kind of the rhythms of being part of that space, on being on staff. And so my experience in terms of living and working is kind of found in a different kind of model than an intentional community. But there's a lot of challenges that are found in terms of being so close in proximity to a facility that I'm managing and overseeing. And so in terms of self-care practices, I do run on a regular basis, and I find that that becomes a way for me to be able to unload certain things. I've got a running path that I kind of along the roads here, and I tell people that sometimes it'll take me to mile 4 to mile 5 to simply unload what's going on, to be able to give the space to be able to live into a more openness in terms of where I need to go. And so running becomes a self-care practice that's very important to me to clear my head, so to be able to engage more intentionally and being more present to the tasks that are before me. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you. And thank you for the reminder that intentional community can be, not necessarily living there, but this question about work-life balance, the internal and the external spaces. It's all valuable. And I hope that if there are folks on the call that are not in an intentional community where you're living and working in that same space, there's value here for the conversation. And thank you, Larry, for that reminder. Okay, Billy, you're up.
Hi, my name is Billy Marc, and I am an artist, and my wife is an artist. We live in Detroit, and we facilitate a space called the Sela House, which is a 4-unit apartment building in kind of the middle of Detroit. And the focus of that community is, it's a space to bring together artists who are wrestling with art and faith, to develop their spiritual art practices, and to connect to community and God and art. We are this little community is set within a quasi-intentional community of about, now there's probably about 80 people within about 2 blocks span. And so if that's the end of the story, then I'll just kind of rewind and say that I'm Billy. And my background in the arts, I started in poetry. I went to school for music. And when I was in school, I found out about the Liturgy of the Hours. And I was like, what? This is amazing. It's like, there's just God, art, community, and food. And like, they just poetry all day. This is amazing. So I started bringing together in my art practice my roots in hip hop as an MC with monasticism, because an MC is master of ceremonies, right? That's right. You're just taking care of the space, right? It's rhythms. We're doing that, rhythms, right? Now it's just liturgy of the hours, just poetry is architecture. No, poetry you can walk through. That's right. So did that. We exploring that, and then my wife and I moved to Detroit, and we're like, we want to start kind of like this art monastery space. But Detroit just really taught us to just let go and kind of move at a slower pace. And so we set aside of all our big ideas, and then we were introduced, funny enough, to a monastery, a Lutheran monastery, about 50 minutes north. And so for the last, I don't know, about 6 or 7 years, we've been going up there on Wednesdays, going there for 24 hours, spending the night, going there and kind of being a part of that community as well. And then taking some of those rhythms, learning from those rhythms, and then figuring out what that looks like in our city and in our neighborhood. When we first moved to this intentional community, there was probably about 13, 14 people, and now and they had been going on for about 10 years before we got there. Now there's probably about, like I said, about 80 people, and then, yeah, so there's a lot of dynamics between intentional community and smaller enclave within the intentional community. So I'm sure we'll probably unpack and have fun with that. But yeah, and then my personal, the self-care is going to the monastery for that day. I can't do without that. It's pretty important. Thanks.
Thanks, Billy. Wow, that's wonderful. Okay, Marc, let's hear from you.
Hi. So thank you for having me in here. I come from a little different perspective than most of you other folks. I haven't actually been in the retreat center space for about 3.5 years now. Interestingly enough, but I was involved in the very beginning of the Retreat Center Collaborative, and I'm just thrilled to death to see the expansion. All these new faces. There's only a couple of familiar faces on here, Kirsten and Ben. And it's just so exciting to see all these new centers that have gotten involved in this really important project. It was really very valuable to me. I was the executive director of the Garrison Institute, which is located about 50 miles north of Manhattan in Garrison, New York. And non-denominational retreat center, both bespoke programs as well as hosted programs and rental programs. And as I said, I haven't been there since COVID time. And I've actually found my inner peace. I moved to South Florida. And if you want some real inner peace, South Florida is a pretty good place to do it, especially in January, quite frankly. But the reason that I'm actually on this call is I saw the Facebook post. There was a question that somebody posed about how do you find the balance and equity when you have people who live on the grounds of the property, and how does that work with them taking care of the property and taking care of them? And this was a really important subject that we spent a lot of time on in Garrison. The building was built in 1932 as a Capuchin monastery, and it had a building on the property that dated from the 1870s, we dated it, that was a carriage house that was retrofitted to become a home. And we had one of our maintenance people, a caretaker, who lived in that home. And we charged him a small amount, I think it was about $500 a month, to live in that home as his home. We paid all the expenses, and he was able to treat it as his own home. And he eventually got married. His wife came and lived with him. But the staff, the other maintenance staff, we had 5 other people on the maintenance staff. How do you find that equity of you have one of the 5 who gets to live on the grounds? The others all lived within the small community, within, let's say, 5 miles of the property. And his responsibility living in that house was that if he was the emergency contact number. And we, at the time, had events in the building approximately 300 days a year. But the building needs to be watched 365 days a year. The heating and cooling systems and water systems and all those kind of things need to be monitored every day. And of course, he's entitled to go on vacation. He's allowed to go out to dinner with his wife. He's not married to having to be on the property. So we had to spend a lot of time. How do we get somebody to cover for John, which was his name, when he needs this well-deserved time off, as well as create equity with the other staff members, because there was a level of resentment with the other staff members. Of course, John should, if there's a stuffed toilet at 3 o'clock in the morning, go and answer it. He's getting this house, for far less than what the market value of the house would be. So we came up with a compensation system, a rolling coverage. At assigned times of the year, we would sit down with the calendar and we would say, okay, when are you going on vacation? When are there groups in the building? When are there not groups in the building? And how would that work? And we would assign, it was divided up amongst the other staff for coverage for those periods of time. It was primarily John's responsibility, but it became everyone's responsibility to be on that rolling calendar. And if you were assigned those days, we would give you a stipend. I don't recall the exact amount. I'm going to say $20 an hour for the shift, that overnight shift. If you just to be on call, if you got called, that went up to $50 an hour. So if the phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning and you had to wake yourself up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go and unstuff a toilet or make sure that the heating system was working, you would get that increased amount. Now, fortunately, we did a study of how many times was John actually called, what were the problems when he was called, were they really problems? Sometimes the retreat manager would call up and just say, we need more toilet paper. It wouldn't actually be, an emergency that required a skilled person to come over and do it. So we came up with this whole program that actually worked quite well, because the staff who weren't living on the grounds now had an incentive to say, oh, sure, I'll cover that shift, because they knew most often they would not be called. And if they were, then so be it. They got that increased compensation. I happened to, at the time, I lived approximately, my home was 75 miles from the center, but I had an apartment that was rented for me that was close by, that I would stay in during the week. But on the weekends, when many of the events were, I couldn't be helpful. If the alarm went off or, something like that, I was 75 miles away. And even during the week, if, for example, the toilet was stuffed, I wouldn't know what to do with it. If there's a leak or something like that, or a problem with the boiler system, I could certainly come over and assess the situation. But I couldn't be helpful, whereas all the maintenance people were trained to be able to do it. So I stayed out of that rotation. There were a couple of instances where there were interpersonal issues with people on the grounds where I was called in, and, I had to do that, but I was the executive director. So of course I needed to, but, we sat down and we came out with this whole plan, and we got buy-in from the whole staff. We created the whole program with their input on what it was that they were looking for, and what would make everyone happy. So thanks for the opportunity to share. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being with us. Okay, Troy, and is Faith with you too? I cannot see. It's your turn. I look forward to hearing from you. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, hi, we're Troy and Faith Bierma, and we are at the Hermitage in Three Rivers. It's a small Christian retreat center.
Michigan.
Three Rivers, Michigan. Yeah, thank you. And it was started in the late 80s by Gene and Mary Hur. They bought a property. They renovated a barn that they literally had to scoop the poop out of the bottom of. And that's our main building, where we have 9 rooms for retreatants. We serve the food there. And then since that time, there's been a couple of other things added. There's the building that we're in, which has our office, and it has our chapel and our library and a group room to meet and chat. And we have 3 cabins out in the woods. So our main thing is basically providing context, an atmosphere of quietness for people to come and retreat. So we have individuals, we have groups, and we are a Christian retreat center. We're open to anybody, but our focus is basically serving the Christian community. So we have morning prayers together, and we share. Morning prayers are open to everybody. So just to back up in terms of the community involvement, there's 3 of us that live here right now. There were 2 that just moved out. Longtime former directors. Some of you know David and Naomi Winger. So they just moved out this past week. Her parents will be moving into their house. So that'll be a change for us as well in terms of the community. But we're sort of it in terms of the long-term residential community, just the 2 of us. There's somebody else who's living here right now that does laundry and so on, serves the evening meals. But in terms of what we do what we do together is we open our morning prayer to the guests, and they can come if they want to, but it's oftentimes just the 2 of us, sometimes 3, and we have meals together. But we are not always a part of the meals, because we have that dynamic where our kids are not really part of this community in the same sense. So it's sort of, I don't know, we're sort of intentional, but we're sort of unintentional, I guess, in that sense, because our kids have a different life. And so we often go home to our house, which is on site, and have the evening meals together as a family. So that's kind of our family time. But it doesn't always work, and sometimes the kids are up there too. We serve the meals in silence. Generally, we encourage people not to, interact with each other. I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule, but your expectations are to have silence, and that you can have space for silence with God while you're here, and you're not going to be kind of lambasted by people around every corner trying to figure out what you're doing here or where you came from. So what else about the Hermitage? Faith, go ahead.
We live on site here at the Hermitage in an earth house, just a stone's throw from our buildings. So there is a sense of being in a fishbowl sometimes. We're always accessible, and it's very difficult to draw the line between work and life. So we struggle with that constantly. And part of our answer has been to not participate in the evening meals, like Troy was saying, to just have a family meal with our kids down at the house. And so that's one thing that we do to try to normalize living in community for our kids. And the other thing that we have instituted since coming here, we've been here for 1 year as directors. We started closing the facility 1 day a week for a Sabbath. So we don't work, we don't take guests, and I don't cook. I do all the meals here. And that has been a game changer for us. We were working 7 days a week, and then you just you take part of a day off here and an hour here, and it wasn't adding up to any kind of a rest for us. So taking a day off was really great. So that's one thing we've done.
How about some self-care activities?
Yeah.
That's sort of part of a self-care thing. But yeah, I chuckled. I think some of you others did as well, because when I wrote back to Erin, she said that some others had given a similar response. But we've been here for a year, and we feel like, to be on a panel of work-life balance,
pretty rich.
we definitely have not found a balance, and some of our self-care things are definitely starting to show, and we're aware of that, and we're trying to deal with some of those things right now. But yeah, it was kind of humorous. I said I need to learn more than I can share on this panel, but
I sense that was why there's so much enthusiasm from all of us. But work-life balance? What is that? We're all on the journey for that. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Okay, Jen, look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, all. Last but not least. My name is Jen Newman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Beacon Hill Friends House, which is a Quaker center for intentional community based in Boston, Massachusetts. So we're not a retreat center, but we're a sort of unique experience that kind of fits alongside a retreat center's work. So we were founded in 1957 to be a Quaker Center for Life and Learning, but we are based in a historic 2 neighboring brick row houses in Beacon Hill, the Beacon Hill neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts. And it was donated in 1957 to become this after the owner of Beacon Hill Friends House, or the owner of this property, John Green, who inherited this property, spent some time at Pendle Hill Quaker Retreat Center and thought it would be a great place for a great thing to have people be in downtown Boston, where there's so many universities, to study and to learn together and be rooted in Quaker values. And so that's a little bit about how we came to be. We're also based on Massachusetts land here in downtown Boston. So those are the native lands that we're situated on. So we have a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. Our mission is there's a fire alarm or smoke alarm being tested right now, I guess. It's a little distracting. So our mission is to embody the Quaker principles of faith, simplicity, integrity, community, and social responsibility in order to nurture and call forth the light in all of us. And we do this by a couple of programs. We provide residency for up to 20 people to live according to Quaker values. And those folks can live here for up to 4 years unless you're staff. Staff can live here for as long as we are on staff. So that's some of what I'll talk to you about today. And our staff predominantly live on site. Right now, we have 2 out of 3 of us who are living on site in our full-time staff. We also have facilities rental programs. So we do rent our space out to community organizations to do work in our space. And we have a hospitality program. So we have 2 guest rooms that we run year round that allow folks to stay kind of in our community, but also in downtown Boston in this experience. And we run our own public events and programs that work to cultivate community, nurture spiritual deepening, and empower collective action. That's a little bit about what we do. And a self-care practice that I engage in is getting offsite. I live here full-time and work here full-time. And it's really, and I live in downtown Boston, so it's really helpful for me to be able to get off-site and really experience nature or be with people who aren't sort of a part of the wider orbit of my organization.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I'll fill in a little bit of the gaps for the intentional community that I'm a part of. The home is called Welcoming House. It's in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And we eat meals together 4 days a week when I was living there. So I'm imagining I am still living there. Eat meals together 4 days a week, but generally 7 days because they were in the kitchen at the same time, all gathering and praying together in the morning and in the afternoon or in the evening. And, you know, splitting up things like chores and being very intentional about games after dinner and conversations and a monthly time of sharing where we are on our faith journey. We all had different roles. So I came in when I moved there as I was a spiritual director with my own practice. So I was doing that. And a year later, began to work with the Franciscan Sisters of Little Falls as the program's ministry director, as I said. And sisters are there as well. And so coming and going, the sisters that I lived with became core leaders of the community. And so, my job is also now tasked with care of the ministry of the Welcoming House, because we also have programs and events there, things like contemplative prayer, and outside groups can come and meet there as well. So a lot of intersections of relationship. So one of the self-care activities that I value is walking. I love to walk. It's gotten very interesting living in Minnesota in the wintertime with walking. So found ways to move indoors during the winter and keep that walking going. So I just want to give us a moment of pause. There are 8 of us that you've just been, listening to. Just pause and just notice what is shimmering, what is sort of there for you in this moment. And if there's any question that's coming up, you can send that to Ben. But mostly just notice. What are you noticing? Hanging with that sense of noticing, I'll ask the panel this question about sense of community. How has your sense of community been shaped by living and working in the same space? How's that been shaped?
Are we going in order again, Jamie?
You can just jump in when you are ready.
What a great question. I'm originally from Ireland, so I grew up in a small community in Ireland where doors were open and people would go in and out. And so and the community is very important, and everybody did everything together, and everybody went to the pub together, and it was a very tribal kind of society. And so when I came to, when I was training in the East, but then when I came to North America, it was a little different. It was something I had to get used to. It's just different. But here in the community, we have 2 spiritual directors, and then there's 10 of us permanently here. And it's funny, when you asked me that question, I went immediately to, because you gave us some of the questions before, I went to the community and I sat down and asked them the questions. So when you say, how has your sense of community, I couldn't help but have their input in here too, not just me. And so if I talk about me and a few others in the community, they have said that they came in wanting to hide and not show up and avoid others, to feeling like they're now very part of a group. And that's, for some people, that's taken nearly 20 years or 10 years, 15 years. It hasn't been something that has happened within a year or two. And we've quite a lot of millennials. We've got a lot of people in their 30s here as well. We actually have from 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So there's somebody from every decade, which is, we're really excited about the diversity of that. And, I was talking to some of those in their 30s, and, some girl in her 40s actually that said, well, I learned the community is not some utopian ideal. It's the guts, it's the nitty gritty, it's of human ego living together. And like reality, it isn't always pretty and fun and pleasant, right? So we've really learned as a community to embrace the good, the bad, and the ugly. So a real day-to-day living together in a community is a constant ups and downs, personally and collectively, right? And another guy in his 30s said to me, well, it's like community are people you just can't leave and you can't live without. And if you can walk away from a community, it's not really a community. And so we also have another person who came from a married family and moved into spiritual community as a newly single person. And he said it's been a real growth edge for him to see and engage in community living rather than isolate into a solo life, so it's quite varies, but it's been a gradual process. It's been a very staged development. There's a period where you're running, I think, who was it? Troy or Faith mentioned the day off. We call it an integration day rather than a day off, because we're all about awakening in this lifetime. So you're taking a day off from what exactly? From the present moment? I don't think so. But so we do. So at the beginning, some of the stages are people are like, I'm out of here. It's my day off, my integration day. I don't have anything to do with this community, and they're off, right? So over the years that now people are sort of, oh, it's my integration day, and you'll see them wandering around property, looking at plants, or, just being a little bit more relaxed and less of a boundary between my work life and my life, right? That my life tends to sort of disappear a bit. So what else do I have to say other than that? Another millennial said to me, I had no idea what community meant before moving to Clear Sky, and he felt like you really just have to live it to know what it's about, and that building a home life practice, living on the land together, is a very intense and at odds with Western ego conditioning, right? So he felt like it really wasn't what people think it is. So you tend to become like a collective organism and like a bunch of organs supporting a larger body. So even that question, I needed to bring in everybody's perspective and not just mine, which says it in itself. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you. I do hear how your sense of community was to go to your community with this question. Lovely. Mm-hmm. Anyone else on the panel? Who's next?
Jump in next. Is it okay if I jump in next?
Yep, go, Jen.
Great. No, I'm echoing the trickiness and challenge of this not always being perfect living and working on site when someone was testing my smoke alarms in the middle of the one time I get to speak. And, I think we know that that's fine. It's actually a sign of my facility working really well that people are testing the smoke alarms regularly. But also a tricky thing, it's complicated. I moved into Beacon Hill Friends House as a resident before I was on staff, which is a really interesting, and I was a board member while I was a resident and before, which is really tricky. But it's interesting moving from being a resident in the community who lives here full time, but has like a full-time job doing something else and kind of participates in community as another part of the fullness of my life. It took over then, my workplace is now also that community, and my relationship to the community is different. But one thing that was really powerful for me in moving from being a staff person to a different organization, doing political advocacy work, to working for the community that I lived for, was that I really got to be known in the fullness of my life. And that has its growing edges and its real beauty in people knowing knowing me as a full person and getting to see different aspects of my life, and also have us hold each other in staff meeting around concerns and celebrations around the pieces of our lives that we want to share with each other, and have that be really real and true. And so for us, part of the way that my community has been shaped by living and working in the same place is really having it be, in all its tricky and complicated layers, me being my full person in my work environment, because it's also my home. And so some things can be celebratory, like my parents are moving and I shipped my childhood toys back the other day, and they came in, and so my residents got to see me kind of unbox my American Girl dolls. I set one up in the office. It was very cute. So maybe I'll send out a picture later. But it also means that, you know, it is hard navigating those moments of like, this is a really personal experience for me, and it is happening at my home, at my workplace, but also navigating that people can support me in those ways as a human person that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And so I think it's a unique experience that my sense of community has been shaped, that people can sort of hold you where you are and still respect you as an employee or as a director of an organization, but also just be caring toward you. I've had folks who've worked with me or done internships with me who become residents and close friends of mine who really support me through other aspects of my life and become part of this like wider circle. And it's tricky for me too, because I work for a Quaker organization. I am a Quaker, though you're not required to be a Quaker to live here or work here. But my Quaker community, I'm a member of the Quaker meeting that meets in this space. Those folks are also often my board members, or often, you know, around. Yeah, there's many intersections of my life. But that means that, you know, we can span conversations from like, how are you doing really, to like, how is the organization doing? And those are appropriate to those relationships. And so it really, it's tender to navigate, but it feels really deep to me. And I feel very cared for by this wider circle of people who are a part of my organization and my professional growth.
Thanks, Jen. I heard full person living, like full living in your personhood, and all in the midst of all those intersections. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to share? Ben, do we have any questions at this point that we want to ask? Okay, great.
I haven't gotten any yet. Definitely
All right.
them if they come in.
That's right. Right. Thank you. Well, we can kind of continue with that sense of community and the impact of living. And Jen alluded to this a little bit about that personal space and personal time and all those intersections. Anything more to be said about that sense of community and the intersections with not only the external space, internal space, but we're also talking about internal dialogues, internal relationships, the whole family system. Anything else to be shared there about community and the integration of personal, public?
I'll mention something a little bit about intersections. And so as I kind of alluded to earlier, we do not have an intentional community that's part of Rolling Ridge. And so I live on property, and I've got another staff person that lives on property. But we had another person that was on property and who was on staff and so forth. And so she was working here and so forth. And I think that one of the things that, you know, given the fact that most of the staff here at my facility does not work on site, there is something that comes when, for those people who do live here, are, as Jen kind of alluded to, the boundaries kind of get a little blurred in regards to the personal and the professional. I think one of the challenges that I'm constantly working with is where do boundaries come into play between the personal and the professional? Because how I relate to the majority of my staff here is going to be different than the ones that I might see when they're not working. And so I think for me, the challenges come when the boundaries between the personal and the professional begin to intersect. And so one of the challenges that we're currently working through right now is that this other staff person just up and left. She basically says, I'm done. I'm giving my notice. I'm not even giving 2 weeks. I'm just simply leaving. And that makes it hard when professionally, as the director of facility, in terms of managing staff, needing to be able to kind of say, it's like, I need to maintain the professional etiquette, making sure that everything is held in the ways that it needs to held. And yet personally, there's another part of this that comes when you're seeing her walking around on property as she's packing up her stuff. How do you go about navigating the personal and the professional? And so I find myself kind of trying to figure out how you do that on the various levels of my responsibilities, as well as my emotional heart that's going in, where I'm sad that she's leaving, but I'm also very upset the fact that she did not come to talk about why she's leaving, wanting to be able to kind of explain some of the decisions that were made. We feel like we invested in her in many ways because she was living on site and doing things that the other staff did not have opportunities for. So for me, it's balancing the personal grief that I'm feeling as well as maintaining the professional side of it. And so that's just one example of some of the boundaries that I find myself kind of dealing with in terms of how the personal and the professional kind of intersect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the 10, go ahead.
You go first.
Well, I was mindful of tending to what's going on inside internally and the real life tasks that are before me, the decisions that need to be made at the same time, and how we tend to the interior spaces. I'd be interested in hearing from folks as to how that goes. So Jen.
Yeah, I was going to name that that's a real tension for us too. What is the role of the director who lives on site in a 20-person intentional community? Because I have a professional responsibility to our residents, and that is different. They don't have a professional responsibility to each other or to me. And so we have instituted a structure here. Boundaries are really important for us, and like actually naming them regularly and talking about when they're crossed, and trying to create a culture of naming, like, hey, knocking on my door at 7 a.m. when it's not an emergency is not going to work. And how do we navigate that tender conversation is really key. And it's just something that's going to have to keep happening for us. So our residents turnover, you can live here for up to 4 years. And so we are constantly in conversation about boundaries for us. One of those things is that I need to be constantly in conversations about boundaries for me professionally and what makes sense for me if I'm having feelings about a thing going on in community. My power as a director means that my opinions can sometimes be like law. And I don't want it to be that way. And so thinking about what are the ways that I can express my opinion and to whom and about what. So we created a support committee, which is a Quaker process of folks who are associated with our board and outside of our organization, who I can talk to about all of my feelings about everything that's going on, and then talk about what is the intervention or thing that I'm going to do in this situation professionally as the director that I can do to kind of steward or tend that community that's here, because that is my role here. And so there's always a level of removal, I think, for me, in terms of being like, everything, all of my emotions and all of the things that I'm feeling that could be held in community because of my role here. And so that's something that we're thinking about both with our board and with all of our staff, are the ways, how can we support staff in those moments when you're feeling frustrated, but your professional responsibility is to this greater tending that needs to happen in community.
Yeah. Are there others on the panel want to chime in about how we navigate that in the interior work and the professional work?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Jamie. Thank you. I always think structure and routine are your friends. We have this saying in our A Clear Sky. And so our shared structure is really something we've paid a lot of attention to. And, you know, having a kind of a cutoff of not working past 9 p.m. and having regular practice together, shared meals with a lot of space and breath and digestion time. And you know, interpersonally, we have weekly meetings and contact points, and basically don't let a bad state or argument or disagreement fester for any length of time. So we do have this thing what we call triangulation, which, you know, if there is something going on with something, we're training everyone to be a leader here on site, so that, you know, training everyone, if somebody's withdrawing, someone's isolating, we're all on it with that person, you know, how's it going, what's going on here. And then if there is conflict between two people, we always bring that third person in. So, you know, the basic skills of counseling, the basic skills of therapy, everybody, we have our tagline, learning together. So everybody comes up to speed with those kind of skills so that we can be there for each other. Yeah, so we try to make conflicts resolved before, we try and resolve them before they actually become something bigger, right? And try to address them that day that it happens. And of course, having our teachers as personal community guides, it's very important for us. And when we talk a lot about time management, I think time management is huge. You know, it's a priority, I feel, for spiritual centers, and talking to our roles and responsibilities very clearly in the weekly meetings to organize ourselves well and work through the conflicts. So being in person together as a group every week is to look at conflict, to look at shadow elements, to get on the same page. And then we do have mind weekends, we call them, like 4, 5, 6 times a year, where we can build team trust and communication and do vision strategy together. So it's very structured. And, you know, many Westerners like, oh, too structured for me. But we do have then Saturday night, we call it fun night, where somebody tends to be in charge of that. Everyone gets a turn to be in charge of that, where, you know, it can be a movie, it could be dancing, it could be, we do karaoke. Karaoke is big for us in our community. So we've got huge selections and everybody sings their songs, and you've got rock from the 70s and 80s, punk from the 80s, and then, you know, you got your millennial, you know, all happening in the same room. It's pretty, it's fun. Yeah, but balancing the fun piece is really important with the structure and routine and the due diligence and the accountability of your portfolio and so forth. Yeah. Management, getting good at that is I think essential for any spiritual explorers in any community. Can't emphasize it enough.
Yeah, that's lovely. 2 examples that come to mind for my community is we do a monthly sharing of what's going on, and it's a time of one person speaks and everyone else listens and just holds that space. And speaking from the I, speaking from the inner work. And then we also end by doing calendaring pieces. But that time to come together to say whatever in a non-judgmental space, I think that's so important that we intentionally hold that space for others. When I came, there was a very common prayer book that was used. And I was there for 3 months, really wrestling with the language of the book. It just did not resonate. And I said at some point, I said, I would love to continue to pray together. That's part of the commitment of our being together. And I can't do it with this book anymore. It's just not in alignment with where I am. And so the community came together and we created a system that whoever led the prayer would look at some of the things that, because I shared specifically what was going on, and then we had alternate sources, and there was just this collective agreement around that, and that just had me feel so welcome and part of that community. Was very, very important. The other piece, the second example that came to mind is I came into a community of sisters. The sisters have been in Little Falls, Minnesota for 130 years. They're deeply into community and deeply familiar with each other's stories, and in a real tradition of sharing those stories with each other. So knowing information about other sisters that just is common. I came in a little more private, and I wanted my story to be my story. I wanted to have the chance to be the one to share any details about my life. And I needed to know that if I were going to share in my community something that was going on with me, that the tradition, absolutely fine tradition of sharing, someone else sharing that story, I needed to know that that wasn't going to happen. And so we talked through that as well. And those to me really gave me a sense of community, really gave all of us an opportunity to work through what does this mean? What is this community right now, of those of us specifically in this room, what does that look like? And what do we need? So Ben, we have some questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you for sharing what you were just sharing. That's really important and special, and something that is hard for folks to learn and get on the same page about, and requires a lot of communication. So it's really good to hear. That comes up a lot in some of these questions that I've received. One question is around communications hygiene. This idea that our use of texts and emails and phone calls, et cetera, in a community where everyone's working on different schedules may mean that it's difficult for some to communicate at a rate or with a certain tool. And so wondering if anyone on the call can talk about efforts at their centers to establish a communications hygiene in their community.
Great question. Panelists?
Well, I like the term communication hygiene. One of the things that we do is because of all the ways that our staff is not all here. And so there are times when it becomes important simply when you remember something to kind of send something along. So we have a code. So if it's something that requires immediate attention, it goes SOS and then the text from there. Or if it's simply an FYI, it starts in FYI and it kind of goes down that way. And so that becomes the ways that, so if someone is offsite and they're in the midst of something, they see FYI or SOS, it simply kind of, it allows for them to say, okay, I don't need to pay attention to this, and they can put it down to when they need. As opposed to when it's an SOS, my maintenance guy who might be offsite goes, okay, I need to tend to this right away. So SOS or FYI begins a text message for my head staff.
I can jump to another question unless other folks have, yeah, Jen?
I can share very briefly. We have two main systems of communication between staff and residents. We have email and we have Slack. I don't know if folks know what Slack is. It's like an instant messaging application that you can have on your phone or your computer. And it uses channels to talk about different, they have like a little hashtag ahead of the channel that you can use to talk about different topics. And so we have some community norms and staff norms around how we use those channels, what one's an emergency, what one needs to be notified. But we predominantly have residents communicate with staff and each other through this medium Slack. And we have different community norms and conversations about how to use different channels and what people are using. But for example, we have a pest control channel where people put rodent sighting, and we have a template for how you're supposed to put where you saw the rodent, so I can tell, or a facility manager can tell the pest control company. But we also have a random and fun channels where people coordinate events together or talk about, like, here's a baby picture that I found and I think is fun. Email we use predominantly for like things we want a written record of, because Slack does not keep records. So if you're emailing about like a committee minute or decision, we also have Google Drive that we keep everything in, and we have an institutional shared drive that we communicate to residents and staff with different permissions. We have staff email addresses that are run through a Google listserv. So staff@bhfh.org will go to all of our staff. And so we have some things that we tell residents, here are the things you email all staff at, and that way we can share the labor of like getting them quarters for laundry and that sort of thing. And so those come to us with little brackets around them that say like staff at. So we know where those emails are coming from and what listserv, and depending on like then the urgency at which we need to address those things. We also in 2011 created a set of community agreements for our house resident listserv that we're working on ideally with our new crop of residents updating for Slack, where there are a list of like, here are some queries, which is a Quaker practice of asking questions that don't have a like right or wrong answer necessarily, but things to think about when we're sending an email to the whole listserv. And so those are kind of guiding in our community conversations around how we use Slack as well, and what channels and how often to pay attention to those things.
Now, just Ed, we have Teams. We don't have Slack, but we have something called Teams at work. And personally, I just figured out which sisters were more tech savvy than others. We have one sister at the house that uses a flip phone. And so I knew if I needed to talk with her, I needed to go find her. And it kind of reminded me of, growing up, we yelled across the house. So, okay, well, I'm not gonna yell down the hall. I'm gonna go find her. And so the old fashioned, really good way of relating, being together. You have another question? Go ahead.
I'll just jump in very quickly, similar to Jen. We use two basic channels, WhatsApp and Basecamp. Basecamp is sort of for projects and keeping together all the communication around the project, and then WhatsApp is real live communication. But also we have a communication protocol, like who needs to know this? Reply all. Does everyone need to know this right now? And very much about how we communicate, the approach that we, when we're communicating, lots of love, lots of kindness, lots of is this kind, is this helpful, is this what isn't, a lot of that discernment is integrated into the community. And the one thing that we are very almost fierce about it, if there's conflict, no conflict on email, no conflict on WhatsApp, no conflict on Basecamp. It's face to face, because things can get very out of control when it goes to that medium for some reason. Yeah.
Shall I pop in with another question here?
Yes.
We have a couple questions that are, I would say, a little simpler. One of them is around eating meals. Do folks who live sort of in residence with each other, are you eating all meals together? Are there some meals that are separated?
I'll answer that. We eat lunch and dinners together. People that are not there in any particular day are on their integration day, and there is a space holder every day and karma yogis, so they will meet for breakfast, but not the whole group will meet for breakfast. Some people are on their livelihood in the morning, so they won't be there at breakfast time, but lunch and dinner, on the whole, the community eats together. Is there a further question to that, or yeah? Okay.
Kind of understanding how folks split it, I think, is the key of the question.
Yeah, we have dinners on Saturday night, kind of Lord's dinners, like a Sabbath meal. And then we'll have barbecues frequently, like block wide rages.
We serve dinner Sunday through Thursday. One of our staff members prepares it, or a resident who's guest chefing. People are not required to go to dinner. It's open. And although we start with a moment of silence, we do eat and talk at the same time in our community. And we have, people are allowed to bring friends to dinner. And so we often have guests in our house, residents, some staff, and like people's friends and community members who join us for dinner.
Oh, I just wanted to add that different people cook meals every day, so it's sort of encouraged to develop your cooking skills. And so as many people that came in weren't good cooks at all, and I can say now they're reasonable cooks, So all of the community had to bear, at the beginnings of one's cooking journey, we'd be all sitting there and go, oh, okay, well, we could do a bit more salt here, we could do a little bit more of sweetening this up, and being very kind and encouraging the person, and eventually it was like, oh great, so-and-so's cooking tonight after a few months or after a year, of improving their cooking skills.
I had experience. Larry, I had experience living in 3 intentional communities, and I think that is how I became a reasonable cook, is from those chores. Sorry, Larry.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to throw in that when I was in California, we in the community there had more regular meals together. We knew it was important to be able to take a sign up in terms of when people were going to show up for meals, because as not everyone would always show up. And if someone's preparing a meal for everybody and only like a few handfuls shown up, it was a little off. And so we always made sure that there was a sign up in terms of if someone was going to be at dinner or if they were going to bring a guest, so it could be counted into the stats for the meal preparation. And it was primarily for dinner.
Yeah, I'll pitch in here and say I do the meals at the Hermitage. We serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner from Wednesday to Saturday, Sunday through breakfast on Sunday. And typically we do eat with our guests at the noon meal, and I set up breakfast, but we don't eat it with the guests. And dinner we have chosen, like we said before, to eat with our family. But that's a lot of community with the residents, but also our community includes all of our guests who are here. So the model of the Hermitage is that they join the rhythm and the resident community who is always here. So there are extended community when they come, and we do enjoy meals together, albeit in silence, which greatly changes a meal. Yeah, is there any question? Anything to add? Yeah, we found too that eating every meal with the guest was a little bit much with our kids. You know, they wanted to tell us about their day, and we eat in silence, and so they said we have to be able to talk to you. So we made that choice pretty much early on, and it's been good for us. So we get a little bit of both community time and just nuclear family time as well.
Or integration family time, something like that, to use Karen's term.
I can jump to a different question here that's a little more complicated, perhaps. Question is, can anyone speak to how they make space for community connection outside of work? And then a little description here. I notice at my center that my days off are investing in rest and disconnection from others. I rejuvenate through alone time. When energy is regained, it's time to work again. And I would rather use this newfound energy to play and explore non-work related connections. Curious if folks have something they can share about how they make space for community connection outside of work.
I'll start by saying that I think we're doing a pretty miserable job of it right now. And, you know, I alluded to that earlier, but one of the things that we would like to be more a part of is the potlucks that some of the broader community, it's not directly tied to us, but Kirsten's group, you know, at the Huss community, maybe some of you are aware of the Huss project. And that's something we'd like to be involved in, but we're usually busy with cooking for our guests on Friday night, so we usually miss that potluck. So yeah, I'll just start by saying we're doing a miserable job, and we're ready for the tips from folks.
I'll just jump in quickly. You know, one of the things that I was very intentional about was trying to integrate the center with the community that we were a part of. The geographic location of the center was kind of down a road, off a road, and it was kind of this mysterious place. We had a sign, but I suspect that much of the community thought it was like some CIA black ops center. So one of my intentions was to get us more integrated in the community. So we hosted events for the local farmers market, and I ended up joining the board of the farmers market. We hosted events for the local Lions Club, and I ended up becoming a board member of the Lions Club. I'm just that kind of joiner guy. I can't say no, but that definitely did help make threads. I mean, it was a relatively small community. The two towns nearby, one had 2,000 people, the other had also a couple of thousand people. So it wasn't hard to become well known within the community and to invite people into the center to be able to see what it was that we did and to be able to share the beautiful building and the beautiful grounds and to just open it up. But to the point of how do you find time for your own self after resting? I mean, I guess the answer is retirement, but I'm not really sure.
So I also, Marc, I also have difficult time saying no sometimes because, man, there's just so much amazing stuff in this world. Like, let's just keep going, doing. I'm realizing that, capacity is a real thing. I didn't know it was for a long time. It's like a real thing. And so, and how that applies to this community life. When we first started kind of coming together as an intentional community, there was those questions of how is this thing going to grow? Are we going to be a circle, or is it going to open up? Like what's that dynamic look like? And what we kind of wound up doing is becoming what I call a quasi-intentional community. And so there are a bunch of different little groups that come together and live near each other, and we kind of organically meet up in large ways and in small ways, so that we can, and so how that relates to finding personal time outside of the work is, I think there's that porousness that we've started to experience in our community, which has also led to a kind of, for lack of a better term, organic growth, translates to hanging outside of what this community life is. I thought that was clear in my head before I brought this up. It really was. I was like, oh, this is a good one. No, what was the point? It's like, yeah. Now I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there.
All right. I'm wondering if, Erin, this is a good time for just a few minutes to stop the recording. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back. So we've just had a fruitful conversation that really opened up this topic from a lot of perspectives, some new ones to these kind of calls, which is really cool to hear the comparisons geographically, urban, rural, different religious traditions, different kind of techniques that people are using to gather their community together, different platforms they're using to communicate, all these things. So I've been really jazzed by that variety. I know other folks on the call have been too. And I think, yes, Jamie, you're right. There's room for us to do another version of this call where we can continue the conversation and go deeper. We have our community call schedule kind of set for the rest of this year, but that doesn't mean we can't do a one-off outside of that schedule. So we'll let you know if we're able to fit one of those in. I wanted to also alert you that it's the last day for our community survey that we're conducting with retreat centers across the US and Canada to learn about these kinds of differences. What is it that you do at your center that's unique? How does that compare to all the other centers in our community? So if you haven't had a chance to fill it out yet, would love for you to give us 15 to 20 minutes of your time to fill out that survey. It really helps us understand how we can serve you better. And better than that, it helps you understand how your center fits in with these other groups and where you might have a unique piece to offer, where maybe your pricing is unique, where maybe your programming offerings put you at a certain benefit, that you're offering something really cool that other centers could learn from, or you find a peer that wants to do something similar to what you're doing. You could collaborate on that. So the data that we gather from this survey is super valuable to all of us. And so we'll make sure that there are ways that we can learn how we might want to use that data together. So there'll be some meaning-making sessions later, including a session in October where we'll be talking about the sustainability study that we recently completed. That'll be one of our community calls in October. So I look forward to connecting with you all more in the coming weeks and months. And thank you so much for sharing all your experiences here. This is super valuable, not only to the folks who are on the call right now, but the people who watch the video next year, who didn't know that there were so many other centers facing the same challenges. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Ben.